All right, before we begin painting our final project, we're going to learn some watercolor techniques on practice paper first. So this is going to be attached to the next available empty page in your sketchbook. So everybody's going to get this photocopy that we're actually going to tape onto the surface. This is called dry stretching. Your table group has a board with pre-cut tape for you. You're going to take one piece of tape, and you're going to position the paper so it's kind of in the center of your sketchbook. And I'm going to set the tape so that it's not covering the spiral. And that's okay if the tape goes over the paper some. Then I'm going to get a second piece of tape. And I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. I'm going to try to line it up near the black printed edge. Then I'm going to fold back any extra tape behind the page so that when I close my sketchbook, the pages aren't all sticking together. So you just need two pieces of tape on the right side and the left side. Then we're going to be writing our names where it says name, because at the end of class you're going to be sticking your sketchbook in the drying rack opened in this position. So I need to be able to see your name when I pass the sketchbooks back out. We know whose sketchbook is whose. So we're going to be practicing 6 painting techniques on this paper to help you determine what technique you like best that you want to use on your actual project. All right, you're going to get a table bucket to share between the 4 of you at a group. Each student is going to get their own watercolor palette. Then 2 students who sit side by side are going to take one of these containers and put between the 2 of you. Then in the middle of your group is your water bowl that the 4 of you are going to share. You're also going to see paper towels in your bucket, so everybody take one piece of paper towel. Inside this container, you're going to see a little spray bottle. Do not spray each other with the water, but you're going to open up your palette and take that paintbrush out, and then using this spray bottle, you're going to spray the top of your paint a couple of times. That's going to activate the paint. It's watercolor. It needs water to activate it to turn to paint. Then your water bowl has a sponge with water on one side and then no sponge on the other side. The side without the sponge is meant to be your clean water. So you always want to start by getting your paintbrush wet to begin with. And then you're going to work through these techniques on your worksheet. So the first technique is called a watercolor wash, and it explains that you're going to use flat color on dry paper, and you can fade colors if you want. You're going to paint right over the top of these words in this space. So the top row are the primary and secondary colors plus brown and black. The bottom row, you've got all your intermediate colors like red, violet, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, green, a turquoise, and then a blue, violet. The white's not really going to do anything on the white paper. So my brush is wet. I've sprayed the top of these. Now I'm ready to start painting. So I'm going to load my brush, and then I'm just going to paint on flat, dry paper. So I could practice fading colors. Anytime I switch colors, I need to clean my brush. Just like when we use acrylic paint, you're going to start with the sponge first. The sponge is going to take off most of the color. Then you can rinse it in the clean water side. So maybe I want that to fade into a pink. So now I add some pink. I'm going to clean my brush on the sponge, rinse it off, and I'm going to put in some purple. So when you do a wash, it's just painting flat solid color on dry paper. All right, so I'm going to clean that brush. Okay, the spot next to it says graded wash. You're going to blend from dark to light. First, you start by painting a wash on one area. I say to the left. So pick what color you want to start with. And if you notice, I am pulling my paintbrush back towards me. I'm not taking my brush and I'm not smashing it into the paper and grinding the brush into the paper. All that does is change the shape of the bristles, and we want our bristles to be nice and flat. So I paint a little bit on one side. Then I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to load it with just water. And now the water is going to start to pull the color away, and that's how you're going to get a graded wash. So it's going to go from dark to light. Just one color, and water is going to make it get lighter. All right. Then we have wet on wet. So it says paint or spray water on the paper first. So I need a clean brush, I can paint water, and then before that water dries, I'm going to put color onto the surface. So when you do this, the water is going to kind of make a tie-dye effect if the water's still wet. If the water's dry, it's not going to do anything. Or I can try spraying my paper, and then I'm going to load my brush with color. So you can see how the paint is just going to kind of go where it goes. You can't control it very much because the water underneath is just going to send that paint wherever it goes. You could also do another spray on top and watch the colors bleed out also. So that is called wet on wet. Okay, your table bucket also has a basket of crayons to share. So the crayon resist says draw with crayon first, then you're going to paint over the crayon on top. Crayons are made of wax. So the water is going to be repelled by the wax. And you could do any designs that you want to. You could even use the white crayon because it will still show up. Okay, so now I'm going to spray my paints again because they've started to dry out a little bit. So now when I paint over the top, you can see how the crayon emerges. So feel free to use however many colors you want to on these samples. And really, today's activity is to test as many colors as possible to determine what colors you like so that you know what colors you want to use on your project. Okay. Then we have a dry brush technique. This says dry all the water off the brush first. So your brush is dry to begin with, but your paints need to be activated in here. If you notice, there's not huge puddles of water on the surface of these paints. So dry brush, you want to see visible brush strokes or textures on the surface of your paper. So this is where I could start to paint in designs. I'm going to clean my brush between every color. Now, you're limited by the size of your brush and what you could do, but the whole idea is that your dry brush technique should look totally different than the wash, the graded wash, or the wet on wet. Okay, the last technique is called the salt technique. This says sprinkle salt on wet paint. So you decide if you want to do a regular wash or if you want to do wet on wet. So I'm going to do a wash on one area. Now, before the paint dries, I'm going to get this little salt container out of this. I'm going to carefully take that lid off, and you could put the lid back inside here so it doesn't get lost. You're going to take a little pinch of salt and you're going to sprinkle it on top of the wet paint. Then I could try a wet on wet technique where I paint the water first. I paint the water first. Then I get my color. I make a wet on wet, and then I sprinkle the salt on top. I could even spray the top of this if I want to. So what's happening right now is the salt is absorbing the color. You're not going to see the effects of it while the paint is still wet, but you leave the salt on the paper until next class. The next class, when it's dry, you can brush off the salt, and I'm not sure if the video is capturing it very well, but you're going to see little speckles in the paint where the salt pulled the color away. Okay, then these are the 6 main techniques. So the bottom half of this page says, in the space below, practice painting the techniques and colors you want to use in the background of your final project. So that's what all this area is designated for. Experiment with any designs, any colors, any techniques you want to use. So you also have one more tool inside this container, and it's this little black thing. So this is like a little air squeezer. So I squish it and air is going to come out of the end of that nozzle. So this could help move your paint around the page if the paint is still wet. And it's best if it's a wet on wet technique. So I'm going to put some water on my paper. I'm going to add some paint in there, clean my brush. And we're just using regular paper today. Your projects are on watercolor paper, so the paper's not going to be as soggy and it's not going to like tear through as easy as today's practice. Okay, while the paint is still wet, I could take this little tube and I could blow the paint and move the paint across my paper. Sometimes it's best to just do a little bit of paint on the page and then take this tube and use it to spray. But you have to share it between you and the person next to you. Okay, so when we're all finished, well, rather, you have to finish this by the end of class today. At the end of class, I'm going to call you a table at a time. You're going to leave your sketchbook folded back behind, and you're going to be placing this in the drying rack to dry overnight. Then, as a group, you need to put all your supplies away in the way that they were provided to you. So the little spray bottle, the little air blower thing goes in here. You want to keep that lid on top of your salt. If the salt spills while you're using it, still just kind of wipe it off back into the container. You need to put your clean brush back inside your paint palette, snap that lid on tight, and then these items are going to get stacked inside your group Tupperware, and you're going to throw away any dirty paper towels.